Chapter 20 Shootout at the N.H. Corral. George Russell told Juan Carrejo and me that he had been buying a quarter of beef from the Coopers each month. Shortly thereafter, Juan and his brother Ambrosio heard from the sheepman who had had supper with them one night. He had told them he was buying all his meat from Cooper. He was getting a whole carcass at a time. Juan asked him to let him know when he bought again. Juan in turn notified Fidel Armijo, inspector of the Cattle and Sheep Association, whom I had met several times since moving to New Mexico. Since Cooper was a deputy, we all knew it would do no good to call in Socorro County officials. I had already found the El Fuego Baca, deputy sheriff of that sprawling county, was also a lawyer in Albuquerque, and Cooper was one of his best clients. The Cooper boys had records, too, but the time had come and the chance to get evidence against them. Fidel came by my house and asked if I would join him in the arrest. I told him I would, and Ethel began her usual objections. Mounted policeman Candaleria Chavez had already deputized Rangers Juan and Ambrosio. I was also specially deputized by him. I was the only Anglo in the posse, the 5 of us. This job had to be done on the spur of the moment, and without outside help from the inspectors who had caught the rustlers with the 2-year-old heifer about to be half-skinned, lost their lives by confiding in the law. The men had crawled up close to them and offered them to surrender, and the heifer belonged to one of the inspectors. One man held the thieves while the other went for the sheriff. The sheriff put all under arrest, and they quickly made bond. The sheriff took the hide to keep it, and it was 2 years before they were brought before court. The hide was so dry and wrinkled that no brand could be seen. All it was hide and stolen heifer. The sheriff ordered it taken to a brewery and see if there was steam so that the brand could be seen. The juror was taken along to see it. When the hide was sprayed out and the brand could be seen, it had the thief's brand on it, as the sheriff had, of course, changed hides. They were acquitted. It had gone on for some time. Beneath the north hill of the Apache Mountains, Fidel Armijo had watched through the nights of some kind of proof that the Coopers were stealing Correjo cows. He had worked for some time trying to pin something on Clay. The Correjo family had been missing cows for some time. Mrs. Noe Correjo saw the 2 younger Coopers as they slipped into her corral and carried off her old milk cow. She sent Henry, her teenage son, to the ranger station. He told Juan and Ambrosio what happened. Officers Chavez and Fidel were ready to move in. That was the morning I rode into the awfulest gunfight I was ever in, thus the seed of my further sorrows. We 4 joined Fidel on the hill before daylight. Mr. Jones from Seven Troughs had been our informer, and we were ready to move in. When we heard the shot that killed the cow, we loped down the hill and raced towards Russell's corral. Pokerface rushed out from his house as soon as he heard the horses coming and offered us a cup of coffee. Juan ignored him and rode on up to the corral gate, and we followed. Chavez says, "Juan, you'd better not go in there. They're heavily armed." Juan jerked the pole off the gate and jumped his horse into the corral. I was right behind him. Bruce Cooper, whom I had already tangled with, yelled, "You dirty Mexican half-breeds! If you come in here, I'll kill you!" Bruce grabbed for his .30-30, which was standing by a post. He fired quickly. The bullet went astray, and the fight was on. I drew out my own gun and then shouted at Clay, "Clay, drop your—" A shot struck the pole near me, and I had an answer. I saw Bruce fire a couple of shots with his .30-30. He ran out of ammunition and reached for a 6-shooter. Bullets were flying in the gray dawn and echoing for miles around. I fired again. I saw Bruce stagger, bleeding and moaning. The cow thief sprang on Juan and grabbed his gun in the brave ranger's stomach. Juan jerked quickly to one side, causing Bruce's shots to hit him in the left side of his belly. It landed between the outer skin and the inner lining. Juan grabbed his gun by the barrel. It landed a head blow with the stock, and the gun broke, and parts of it went flying through the air. Bruce Cooper staggered crazily towards the fence, and just as he got on top, Ambrosio yanked him down, and Bruce fell dead at his feet. I saw Fidel with his gun pointed at the old man's throat and yelled for him not to kill him. Fidel had grabbed Clay Cooper and was using him as a shield. Fidel had ridden into the gunfight with 1 bullet and a missing magazine. Harmon Cooper, wounded after having been shot through the mustache, fired toward the two in desperate try of rescuing his father. At the same time, a young son rushed from the house and fired at Fidel. Clay Cooper dropped dead from a bullet from one of his own sons. Harmon weakly shed his gun and lay sprawled in a pool of blood on the cold ground. Such an assemblage of human waste I had never seen. With the crippled Cooper boy who had rushed from the house was Mrs. Cooper and an older daughter. The mother had a shotgun. The girl was carrying a .22 rifle. They were coming on fast. Mrs. Cooper was yelling, "They're going to kill us all! Shoot! Shoot them down!" Juan told Ambrosio to get the girl's gun. He tried, but the girl held tightly. Juan walked up and jerked it from her, and in the process cut her hand rather badly. Mrs. Cooper shot wildly with her old shotgun. It flared and cut her hands, knocking her down. She lay there screaming and crying, so I went to her. I bound up her bleeding hands as best I could while she cursed and swore she would see me dead and in hell for this. We approached J.C. Latham, their hired man, and he threw up his hands and said, "You men don't want to kill me. I don't know what is going on. I haven't been here that long." He actually hadn't taken part in the fight. Later, Latham would give a statement to the press telling the correct version of this gunfight. He disappeared, however, before my worst trouble came and just when I could have used him. I felt a surge of pity for Mrs. Cooper. Before her lay her dead husband, a dead son, and one badly wounded. I had meant her no harm, yet I'd wiped out the father of her 5 children. I told Latham to bring me a rope to tie Harmon with, though I doubted he needed any tying. 2 of his front teeth were missing, as he had been shot right through the mustache. Someone helped Juan to his horse and led him back to the ranger station. He never fell to the ground, though wounded. Upon his death in 1957, at age 70, he was given a citation of Congress for aid rendered to the state of New Mexico with his own area. Ambrosio lives in a rest home in Albuquerque. We got Harmon into the house. With the help of Mrs. Cooper, I tended his wound. Then some of the others of the Cooper clan rode into the yard and yelled for me. I stepped onto the porch and said, "We don't want any more shooting today, but if you start anything, you'll get some of the same medicine your friends got here." They looked around, and Bruce and Clay, and said no more to me. It seems that Juan had left Henry at the station to see that no one would use the telephone to call for help. He anticipated a shootout. I saw Lolita Cooper when she mounted Amy's horse to run for help. Since he was a man who stood over 6 feet in his stockings, the stirrups were far too long for the young girl to reach. But down the road she sped, stirrups flying in all directions. Henry refused to let her at the phone, so she rode on to Gannon Ranch for help. In the meantime, Ramona, Juan's bride, and Nella Carrejo had heard the shooting from their place, and they ran over to my house, got Ethel, and the 3 of them were running towards the NH Ranch when they saw Lolita coming towards them in a cloud of dust. The 3 women jumped behind a tree, and Ethel cried, "Oh, they're coming! They'll kill us!" And all they could see was stirrups flying around in the dust. After the girl passed, the women ran on. They met Juan and the man who was leading the horse. When Ethel was told I was still alive, she fainted dead away right there on the trail. The town of Socorro was about 125 miles from where we were. Calls were made to the ranger station for a doctor and for the sheriff of the county, Joe Baca. We called the superintendent of the Forest Service in Magdalena, also the postmaster at Aragon, and some justice of peace that the bodies couldn't be moved before an inquest. George Russell had gone to Silver City on business, and he missed the entire fracas. While I waited for the sheriff to come, I asked Mrs. Cooper for the towels and sheets to wash the face and hands of the dead men, the sheets to cover them with. She gave them to me with plaintive cursing and abuse for what had happened. I was the only one of the 5 who had stayed after the accident, and she took all her hate out on me. She made many threats that day. Some she carried out, and caused my family much heartache before we were able to get out of that country. Little did I realize that when I would spend time in the pen at Huntsville as an indirect result of this range war, I learned the horror of loneliness. When I finished with the dead men and made the shade over them, I sat down to wait, and it was not until I had realized just what had happened to me. I thought about the danger I'd just gone through and worried about the outcome. My clothes were soaked with sweat and blood, and one nail was gone. I was shaking, though I had a chill, but I knew I wasn't cold. My nerves had begun to relax, and the strain was telling on me. I sighed deeply and tried to compose myself. When the fight ended, May 11th, 1918, the sun was just peeping over the mountain. 5 posse men had faced in the early hours of dawn 3 of the orneriest rustlers in the patch of continuing frontier. These wide lopers had been protected and defended time and time again by county officials. The fight took place on a Saturday. It lasted about 23 minutes. Lots of bullets can fly in that short period of time. Henry Graham and Odie Gann and his brother rolled around the place until the law came. At 6 in the evening, Sheriff Joe Baca, El Fuego's cousin, showed up with the Justice of the Peace. They held an inquest. Joe Baca gave me the hardest and dirtiest look I've ever been put forth. We listened as Mrs. Cooper raved on about arresting me for murder. She cried and carried on and claimed she was afraid of me. Joe Baca asked me for my gun and tried to arrest me. I refused to hand them over, so he told me that I'd be in Aragon by 9 Monday for the preliminary hearing. The other 4 lawmen were also charged with murder. We all had to give $10,000 appearance bonds pending action from the grand jury, which would meet in Socorro in the following September. I told Joe Baca that I was too involved with the fights, and other than just the fact I'd been duly deputized. He told me I was sure thought I was a blankety-blank smart for not telling El Fuego my business. I replied, I don't do much talking. This was my business and not yours or El Fuego's. I've learned the hard way how to keep my business to myself. I saved my family lots of grief that way. He blabbered on in Spanish, but I knew he was cursing me. Then one night, shortly after my horse was shot out from under me along the mountain trail that led from Aragon to the ranger station. One shot went into the fork of my saddle under me and broke my horse's back, killing him and leaving me at foot. That put the finishing touches to my wife's fears. I knew I would have to get her started back to Texas, and she would never last until the trial in September. She was expecting her 5th child, and travel would not be easy for her. When I told Ethel of my decision to send her to her people in Stonewall County, she immediately began packing. She hated New Mexico for all we had had with threats and trouble since we had bought land here, but we met with many disappointments before I got her to the train. I believe Mrs. Cooper was one of the cruelest women I've ever known. She seemed bent on revenge, mostly on me. When I started in Socorro in a wagon, the first thing that happened was an axle on my 3 wagons broke and got 5 miles from water, shade, or wood. I was driving one wagon, Ethel the other, and Latham had hired on to drive the other and help however he could. This infuriated Mrs. Cooper, too. While we were stopped on the road, Mrs. Cooper passed us in her fine car and showed her appreciation of our hard luck. It took us 4 or 5 days to make it into Socorro. I had to make a new axle for the wagon. The entire thing was getting out of proportion, making it seem like a wild nightmare. Ethel had been telling me we had left God's country, and I was beginning to think she was right. During our trouble on the road, Mrs. Cooper passed us several different times going into town.